All right, everybody. I am Christina Gorga. I am also based out in the DC area with Emily and Caesar. So today you're going to hear me talk about something a little less Tableau oriented, but I will be talking a little bit about how to use Tableau with this topic. So we're going to be talking about data couture, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that exactly means. And a little bit about me, a little bit of a short bio. I am a lead data visualization designer with Booz Hamilton. It's a big consulting firm in the DC area. We primarily work with a lot of federal clients, but I'm kind of a little bit unique in that I actually work mostly with a commercial operations team internally within Booz Allen to provide them insights and analytics that help drive the business. And actually this photo that I put on here is actually taken by my husband. Usually I'm not the one that's in front of the camera. I actually do, as a side hobby, I actually do quite a bit of the photography for my husband's men's style Instagram. So in case you're ever interested in following me on Instagram, you'll notice that sometimes I have a lot of stuff that I'm doing with my husband, mostly because I'm doing a lot of things behind the camera. So I want to open up with a quote from probably one of the more prolific designers that we've had in the last 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, the late Alexander McQueen. I find beauty in the grotesque, like most artists. I have to force people to look at things. Now, what does that have to do with data visualization, you might say? Well, we will take a further look at that. But what do data visualization folks want to do? We want people to look at things, right? So I think that Alexander McQueen and data visualization, as well as all their fashion designers, have a lot in common, and we'll unfold this as we go through this talk. So a couple of years ago, as a background, I have always really been interested in high fashion, and from much more of a conceptual side. I went to go see Alexander McQueen's Savage Beauty exhibition at the Met in New York City. This was a number of years ago. I can't remember if it was like 2012 or 2013. It was a while ago, but this was after his death. He died in, I guess it was like 2009 or early 2010. I can't recall, but I know that it was sometime after I graduated from college. And I remember going to the Met to see this exhibit. Not only were the lines insane, but there was a reason for that. This exhibition was unlike any other fashion-oriented exhibition I had ever seen. The coolest thing about it was that they piped in Alexander McQueen's quotes and his voice into all the exhibitions as you were walking through and seeing his art. So not only were you getting still his perspective, and that was maybe to some people that was kind of eerie, but you could kind of have a better sense of who he was as a designer and why he made the decisions that he made, and why he conceptually designed the clothes the way that he did. Because Alexander McQueen was very much in the late 20th century, the 1990s and the early 2000s, very much known for doing very unusual, very borderline grotesque, contemporary art in the form of fashion. So the wilder, the better, but there was a reason for why he was doing it. And honestly, he said something to the liking of, I don't want fashion to be boring. Fashion is meant to be on display. It's meant to be theatrical. So when I walked through this exhibition, it was just like you're seeing in this snapshot here. You would go into these giant halls, and there would just be these glamorous, massive dresses with some of the headpieces and that he would have people wearing as they were going through the catwalks. And so you can see here these things, they have these gold headpieces. And so he wanted people to look at fashion in different ways than maybe people were used to beforehand. Because beforehand it was, back in the 50s and the 60s and beforehand, everything was very glamorous, but it wasn't really meant to be as shocking as the way that Alexander McQueen really put fashion on display. So to talk a little bit more about what couture fashion is. Fashion is high concept. Usually most of the fashion that you will be seeing on your ordinary catwalk is not really meant to be worn outside on the street. It's usually meant to be mostly a conceptual piece of that encapsulates a particular designer's perspective. It can also be shocking. Actually, bringing back Alexander McQueen at one of his early 2000s shows, he had what was sitting in the middle of the catwalk, a giant mirrored cube, and made the people that went to go see the show stare at it and uncomfortably at themselves for 30 minutes before he unveiled what was in the cube. And there were a bunch of models actually sitting inside of that cube before they actually started the actual show. So it was meant to make people unbearably uncomfortable. So not only can you have catwalks where it's also talking about very out of the ordinary clothing, but you're also talking about how humans relate to each other and how we perceive clothing. And then also, on the flip side of this, clothing and couture fashion can also be wearable if we're talking about ready-to-wear collections. And I will be showing you a couple of examples of this in the next slide. I did bring up the Alexander McQueen Spring-Summer 2010. That was one of the last collections that he ever did. And the particular feature that I want to bring up here is that it was very animal and nature-oriented. But the thing I really want to point out is those crazy shoes. They're like these claw animal hoof shoes. And what you can't see from the side profile is that it's got this teeny tiny stiletto on the actual heel of the shoe. And actually these shoes were made really well known because Lady Gaga actually used them in her Bad Romance video that was released that same year. So a couple of examples that I want to talk about in terms of what is examples of what is high concept fashion, as well as what is wearable fashion, and how different fashion designers have been able to incorporate their ideas, their perspectives, as well as nature and technology into their work. So I wanted to just sort of talk a little bit about a few examples. The first one I want to bring up is Issey Miyake. Issey Miyake has been known since like the 90s for doing very innovative pleating techniques, using very old school pleating techniques, but doing them with particular tech fabrics. So he was actually, if you want to talk about people that have actually been doing work with technical fabrics in the way that we talk about it now, Issey Miyake was one of the front runners to doing that in his clothing. So you'll see in this one, even from his fall 2016 collection, he had sort of these pleats that are all built into his clothing that move the way that people move. And kind of to follow up with Issey Miyake's stuff, you also have Iris Van Herpen. And Iris Van Herpen has actually been more of a recent addition to the fashion design scene. Iris Van Herpen's really interesting because for a lot of her art, she's actually using 3D printing as a basis for a lot of the clothing that she is building. So that dress that you see there, that was all created with a 3D printer. So she takes a lot of old school fashion design techniques and then builds it with what is 21st century technology. And actually with a lot of the fabrics that she does use, many of them are eco-friendly and renewable or reused fabrics. So very different than what you will see on the right-hand side. I have Carly Kloss here from Diane von Furstenberg's fall 2018 collection. And she is wearing what we would all identify as a very DVF item, which is the wrap dress. And wrap dresses have been out ever since DVF has been putting out collections since the 1970s. They're a very timeless piece, but people immediately identify it and say, yes, that is a DVF design or it's DVF inspired, because Diane von Furstenberg has been known for creating the wrap dress. So what is more timeless than a dress that, you know, fits all different kinds of body types? And that way you can actually have it not only just on the runway, but also onto the catwalk. And to switch gears here, well, we have data visualization, which is what many of us that are on the call are actually doing. And we're probably wondering, well, Christina, we just talked about high couture fashion. What does this have anything to do with data visualization? Well, data visualization can be revealing. It's revealing about what kind of data that you have behind it. So for example, it may help you piece through a very large data set to reveal different insights that you may not necessarily look at if you saw a bunch of raw data in a table. It is also purposeful. So there's a certain reason for why people design things the way that they do in data visualization. So for example, here I've put Charlie Hutchison who is a big time Makeover Monday contributor. This is one of his visits from 2017, but you'll see here that he's highlighted the basic accessibility component of why they need to improve it, because it only has basic accessibility. So it really brings that piece out from the data in what would be typically your standard stacked horizontal bar chart. So, but Charlie Hutchison is also being known for being like the bar, I don't know if his nickname is Bar Chart Charlie, but you'll notice on his Tableau public page, if you follow him, you'll see that a lot of his Makeover Mondays and a lot of his contributions that he has all include some elements of bar charts, which actually I find is a really good sense of, you have a sense of style and you have a sense for what works well for you as well as what works well for the data. So having sort of that sense of self and that sense of this is a design that I own, that is very similar to what we've probably seen with the past fashion designers that I was showing you before. And also data visualization is a very iterative process. For many of us, we're going through lots of different ways to create and well, maybe I want to look at something in this way and then changing it around and looking at it from a different chart or a different perspective, having people look at it as well, saying well, have you considered this for your design? So data visualization is meant to be a very iterative design process. And not only that, but data visualization is also consumable. So for us, we're looking at things that we can actually use in our jobs as well as things that we can take on the road with us. So for many data visualizations, for example, The Economist and some data journalism, it's meant to be consumed on the road from your phone. You can scroll down. They'll have those the scrolly stories, I guess is what they call it. So data visualization is meant to be a consumable feature. And I want to bring up, when we're talking about, when I brought up Charlie Hutchison, I wanted to bring up a couple of folks that I feel that have a very distinct data visualization design. Some of them aren't necessarily in the Tableau world, but some of them do interact quite a bit with people from all parts of the data viz community. So Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic has been doing the storytelling with data for a number of years now in her consulting business. So a little bit about Cole, she often gives corporate or private or public trainings to maybe people that aren't necessarily data visualization practitioners, or maybe are data visualization practitioners and want to improve their work. And for some reason, ever since I've had her book, she's designed it so that everything is kind of using this blue with light gray look and feel. So you can definitely tell when something is touched by Cole that this is a very Cole look and feel in all of her vizzes. I don't think that she strays too much out of the blues and grays. And then you have someone like Neil, and Neil is a pretty well-known face in the Tableau world. He's a Zen master. I think this was his first year being a Zen master. But even before then, he was doing a lot of these really cool, very out-of-the-box visualization art, I guess you could say, with his work. And if you check out his Tableau public page, you'll notice that he does things that most people that I encounter that use Tableau on an everyday basis wouldn't even dream of doing. So the one example I wanted to pull out was his Minimalist Muppets, kind of poster style example of some of the work that he has done. And it is fantastic. I think he actually produced some t-shirts of either the Minimalist Muppets. He also did one of like Minimalist Simpsons, and they were very cool. And not only do they look great online, but they also look really good on a t-shirt. So Neil Richards does some fantastic creative work, but because of that, he has a very distinctive design, because he tends to stay away from things that I guess many of us would do with Tableau in our daily work. So, you won't see a whole lot of text table types of things from him, but you're going to see lots of things that have been inspired by design and art. And he manages to get Tableau to do things that I could never even imagine. So kudos to Neil and Cole for having a very distinct design focus. So again, let's bring this back to data viz and fashion. So what does this have to do with each other, and can these things coexist? Why, yes, they can. So as I mentioned before, both of these topics are and worlds are very much in the same space. We're influenced by what else is around us in data viz. We're influenced by those that consume the work that we do, as well as we're trying to drive sort of a sense of understanding our data better. So for fashion and data viz, they are very similar to each other. Now the question is, how do we actually integrate the two? So there have actually been a couple of folks in the Tableau world who have managed to start this discussion, or also creating their own art that they can wear that talks a little bit about data viz and data viz engagement in general. So Lindsay Betzendahl, this past year, I noticed she had a couple of Twitter posts where she talked about hashtag clothing as data viz, and she highlighted certain pieces that she actually already owned in her closet that had features that would be very suitable to recreating with actual data behind it in Tableau. And so this particular skirt that she had on, it's a hexagon print type of skirt. She's like, well, maybe this could be something that we could recreate into Tableau as, an actual data viz with actual data behind it to represent something and not just be, a print. So Lindsay, I think she's done a couple of posts about it. I don't know if she's sort of followed through on it, but if you're interested in seeing her sort of design process and her inspiration for her work, I believe that she is giving a talk later this afternoon at Tableau Fridge Fest, so do not miss that. Secondly, Jewel Laurie, I think she's a product manager at Tableau. I don't know Jewel personally, but I do know that at previous times she's actually created her own t-shirts and clothing and skirts, you name it, with data components behind it. So what you kind of can't see here from that photo below is that she actually has an area chart that was built, I believe, in Tableau, and then she screen printed that onto the fabric that made that skirt. So again, somebody that's doing stuff that's actually created with actual data that was produced in an actual tool behind it, that is actually produced into actual clothing that she wore. And I think that she's worn stuff to various like Tableau conferences in the past, but I can't remember if she's been continuing to do that. So Jewel, if you're out there, shout out to you, because I would love to have some of the stuff that you produce. And also, I want to highlight some data community wearables. So things that may not necessarily be made by those of us in the Tableau community, but stuff that's out there that is very much based on actual data and numbers behind it. So there was one company that I found online a few days ago called Meshu. And what you can kind of see here is it looks like this geometric sort of minimalist jewelry piece, but actually the cool thing about this stuff is that it's made with actual geolocation data. So it can be customized to, say for example, I want to plot out my favorite places that I've ever traveled to. And it'll plot those out by Latin longitudes and create lines between them to create sort of a singular geometric figure, which can then be produced onto necklaces, earrings, bracelets, you name it. I don't know if they're actually still producing stuff anymore, but it said on their website the other day that they are no longer accepting new orders, which is such a bummer because this would have been such a cool Christmas gift to give people. But Meshu, if you are out there and you are still building these kinds of jewelry, I would love to have one. And then there is a project, that larger project, it's a sort of a civil public project called the Tempestry Project. And this is kind of on a very different vein. It's talking about climate change. So when you see these scarves, it's like, well, they're actually built off of temperature ranges. So what you see here is, you know, for one given scarf, that might be representative of a particular year, for a particular area or like city, for example, like Phoenix, Arizona, for example. And you wanted to look at the changes in temperature bands over time for a given year. And so you'll see that, you know, you'll have like a certain range. So for each piece of yarn, it will represent a particular temperature range. So you can see over time the fluctuation or the trend to, you know, in a place like Phoenix, more days where it's above, you know, 110 degrees in the spring and summertime. So being able to see that and have it be an engaging experience for those that not only are wearing them, but also people that are seeing them in exhibits. So a lot of people in the country, they'll do these kinds of data tapestry, scarf projects so that they can sort of have a better sense of our relationship to climate data and how can we better educate people on climate change. So it's kind of a very unusual way to do it. So to follow up from that, and you know what people have been doing in the Tableau data community with clothing as data viz, or you know building their own sort of data viz inspired clothing or accessories, as well as what is going on in the larger data community with people actually making wearables that are built with data behind them. Where do we go from here? So I've been thinking about this for the last year, and this is, you know, part of a personal discussion that I had with a couple of women at the Data Plus Women meetup at Tableau conference this year. And I said, you know, I would really love to be able to build or create clothing for people in, not even just in the data community, but for people broadly outside of the data community to understand data literacy and engage with data more. So one of the ways that I'm kind of thinking about this is, well, what are things that are products that haven't really been made a whole lot that would make a whole lot of sense for people to share, as well as to possibly even sell if they wanted to. You know, for example, at Tableau conference for 2019, would we be able to do something where we would have, not an Etsy, but some sort of shareable shop where people could actually broadcast and say, hey, I have, you know, silk printed scarves that have data viz behind it. I would love to share these with people in the data viz community as well as outside of it. So I was thinking about this in terms of, you know, what would be really cool is if you took like those highlight tables and produced them into things that I could, you know, reasonably wear out and about, and people could be like, oh, that's really pretty. Like, what is that? What is that actually? Or where did you get it? And I'm like, actually, I built it with data behind it. And so being able to wear those things out and about would allow me to, and others, to engage with people that aren't necessarily a part of the data analytics community. So I've been thinking about this from a perspective of what are objects that are easy to produce, or relatively easy for me to produce, especially. So I was thinking like jewelry, like earrings, you know, clutch purses that are made out of renewables or eco-friendly fabrics, as well as like silk print scarves that actually have data visualization prints on them. So this is just kind of a starting topic, but what I really want to do is for those that are in the Tableau community and broadly speaking the data community to talk a little bit more about this topic and what kinds of things would you like to see that you haven't been seeing at, either conferences or on Etsy that you would love to be able to wear, to not even just promote your field, but also to sort of engage with others in possibly topics that are of, some amount of like political like sensitivity, like public health issues. So wearing scarves that have data about, immunization data. So like looking at the immunization rates for certain things like measles and being able to share that information with others. So that's kind of where I've been thinking about. And so what I would really love is if you would reach out to me. I provided my Twitter handle here. It's #PolandCogsci. And if you want to also do #DataCouture today and in the upcoming days, I would love to hear and talk about some ideas that you have for products or for pieces of clothing or accessories that you would really like for people in the data community to produce.
All right, Christina, thank you so much. Data is so hot right now. I love it.
Yes, it is.
I love it. And I think it's such a great way to help create conversations around data, especially for those, like we might think it's cool, but it could really open up conversations for people who aren't in the data world. So thank you so much for sharing this. And everybody, I would encourage you to connect with Christina on Twitter or on Instagram. Use that #DataCouture, also #TFFNorthAm.